The first thing I learned about Brenda was that she didn't care about the law. She cared about her clipboard as she stood on my property, screaming for the police to arrest me for trespassing on my own ancestral land. I realized she had made a fatal mistake. She thought her HOA title gave her power over the entire valley, but she was about to find out that the very road she used to drive her luxury SUV home every day didn't belong to the county. And it certainly didn't belong to her. It belonged to me, and I was about to close the gate. The morning started like any other on the Miller estate. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the deep territorial silence that comes with owning 40 acres of untouched Montana dirt. For 3 generations, my family has held this land, but 5 years ago, a developer bought the ridge to my north and built Whispering Pines, a collection of 400 overpriced McMansions governed by an HOA that acted more like a local dictatorship than a neighborhood committee. I had ignored their existence, but today the HOA was coming for me. I watched from my chair as a neon yellow safety vest marched toward my driveway. It was Brenda, the HOA President, followed by a man in a sharp charcoal suit. They didn't stop at the property line. They walked right up to my 1974 Ford F-150, a truck that had more character in its rusted bumper than Brenda had in her entire body. She started scribbling on her clipboard before even acknowledging me. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice cutting through the morning air. Brenda didn't look up. "Mr. Miller, I presume. I'm here to issue a formal citation. This vehicle is a violation of Community Code 4.2. Non-operational or unsightly vehicles must be garaged. Furthermore, your tool shed is painted a shade of blue that isn't on the approved palette. You have 48 hours to comply, or the daily fines will begin at $500. I took a slow sip of my coffee and leaned back. "Brenda, right? I think you're confused. I don't care about your code, and I definitely don't care about your palette." Brenda finally looked at me, her eyes narrowing behind her designer sunglasses. "This isn't a request, sir. By proximity, you are part of the Whispering Pines ecosystem. Our bylaws ensure aesthetic continuity for the entire area." The man in the suit, Marcus, stepped forward. "Sir, we've been lenient. You're listed as Plot 402 in the 2020 expansion map. You actually owe 3 years of back dues. We're here to collect, or we'll start the lien process on this property." I couldn't help it. I started laughing. "Plot 402? You guys really didn't check the courthouse, did you? You see that stone pillar over there? The one your Welcome to Whispering Pines sign is currently bolted to? That marks the edge of the Miller deed. My grandfather never sold that land. He never signed your developer's agreement." Brenda scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound. "We have the digital maps, Mr. Miller. You're in our jurisdiction. Move the truck and paint the shed, or we involve the authorities." I stood up, my height casting a long shadow over them. "Get off my property now." Brenda didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "Fine. We'll do this the hard way. I'm calling the sheriff to report a hostile resident and a public nuisance." 20 minutes later, Deputy Holloway pulled up in his cruiser. I'd known Holloway since we were kids, and I could tell by the look on his face that he didn't want to be there. Brenda practically ran to his window. "Officer, this man is in gross violation of ordinances and is now threatening us while we are on community managed common ground. I want him removed so we can finalize the citation." Holloway looked at the Welcome to Whispering Pines sign, then at the gravel under his boots. "Community managed property, Brenda?" Marcus stepped in, waving his tablet. "Yes, look at the GPS. This entrance road and the surrounding 15 feet are designated HOA common ground. Mr. Miller's house is technically behind us, but he's currently occupying our easement." I walked down the porch steps, carrying an old leather satchel. "Deputy, before you do anything, I need you to look at a physical document. This is the original land grant from 1912 and the 1954 Surveyor's map. I laid the map out on the hood of my truck. Holloway leaned in, his interest piqued. See this red line? I pointed to a specific marking. In 1954, my grandfather made a deal with the county. He allowed them to run the main access road through this land, but he never gave up the title. He granted an easement for public transit only. The deed explicitly states that if the land is used for anything other than transit, like private signage, guardhouses, or HOA landscaping, the easement is void and the land reverts back to the Miller family. Marcus's face went pale. That's that can't be right. I ignored him and kept going. And here's the best part. Look at where you're standing, Brenda. This specific 3-acre triangle where your fancy $50,000 stone gate, your fountain, and your guardhouse sit was never part of the easement. My grandfather made the town build a road around it to preserve a specific oak tree that's since died. This is private Miller land. It always has been. Brenda let out a shrill laugh. You're lying. This is our entrance. We pay for the flowers here. Holloway walked over to the stone gate, brushed away some dirt, and found an old iron survey pin buried near the base. He sighed and looked at Brenda. Brenda, Marcus, he's right. I remember my dad talking about this. The county road actually shifts 20 feet to the left up ahead. This entire entrance island belongs to Miller. The silence that followed was heavy. The power Brenda had been using to bully the neighborhood for years had just vanished. So, I said, crossing my arms, you came onto my porch and threatened my home. You told me you'd find me for my truck and paint my shed. Well, since you called the deputy here to enforce property rights, let's do it. Deputy Hollow, these people are trespassing on my private land. I've asked them to leave, and they refuse. I'd like to press charges. Brenda was vibrating with rage. You can't do this. This is the only way into the subdivision. I smiled. Actually, there is a construction gate on Fifth Street. It's unpaved, full of potholes, and adds about 5 miles to the trip. But it's definitely an earth tone road. Since you don't like my truck, I think I'll start by putting a fence right here. Within 2 hours, I had a roll of orange construction fencing and several no trespassing signs. I began stringing the fence directly across the main entrance of Whispering Pines. The chaos was instant. Luxury SUVs began backing up for half a mile. People were leaning out of their windows, screaming and honking. Brenda was on the phone with the HOA's lawyers, her face turning a shade of purple that was definitely not HOA approved. By noon, the HOA's legal team arrived. They spent 3 frantic hours in their cars making calls to the county recorder. Every time they looked up, they saw me sitting in a lawn chair in the middle of the entrance road, calmly sipping my lemonade. Finally, the head lawyer approached me. Mr. Miller, we've reviewed the 1954 deed. There was a clerical oversight during the digital migration in 2020. You do indeed own the land where the grand entrance sits. I know, I said. We are prepared to offer you $200,000 for a permanent easement, he said. I shook my head, not interested. 500,000. Nope. Brenda marched over, her composure completely shattered. What do you want, you hillbilly? You're holding 400 families hostage. I stood up slowly. A crowd of angry neighbors had gathered at the fence, listening. I want 3 things, I said. First, a notarized document stating the Miller estate is forever exempt from HOA jurisdiction. Second, a public apology for the harassment posted in our newsletter. And third, I looked Brenda dead in the eye. The HOA president must resign immediately. Her management style is a nuisance to the peace of this valley. You replace her with someone who minds their own business, and I'll sign a 99-year lease for this entrance for $1 a year. The neighbors behind the fence went silent. Then a voice called out from a car. Resign, Brenda! We want to go home. Another voice joined in. She's been a nightmare anyway. Give him what he wants. Soon the entire crowd was chanting, Resign, resign, resign. Brenda looked at the people she had bullied for years, then at the lawyer, who simply nodded. With trembling hands, she threw her clipboard onto the gravel. I quit, she screamed before she storming off towards her house in tears. The paperwork was signed out by sunset. The orange fence came down, and the line of cars began to move. As each neighbor drove past, they gave me a thumbs up or a wave. Marcus stayed behind for a moment. You really had us, Miller. That was a hell of a checkmate. I watched the light of my house flicker on in the distance. It wasn't a game, Marcus. It's just about knowing where you stand. And I know exactly where my dirt ends and yours begin. I walked back to my porch, my old truck still sitting proudly in the driveway. The HOA tried to move my world, only to find out they were standing on it.